It was an unusually cold night in early October, and the moon hung low in the sky, casting an eerie glow over the dense forest. Max, an avid outdoorsman with a love for adventure, had decided to take a shortcut through the woods on his way home from a weekend camping trip. The winding, narrow road was barely visible under the thick canopy of trees, and the chilling wind whispered through the leaves, creating an unsettling atmosphere. As Max drove deeper into the forest, he noticed the trees growing closer together, their gnarled branches reaching out like skeletal hands. The road, once well-maintained, now seemed overgrown and neglected. A sense of foreboding crept over him, but he shrugged it off as the result of his overactive imagination. The headlights of his truck pierced through the darkness, illuminating patches of the road and the occasional reflection of animal eyes in the distance. He slowed down, feeling a growing unease as the shadows danced around him. Just then, he saw a figure standing by the side of the road. It was an old man, his clothes tattered and his face obscured by a wide-brimmed hat. Max pulled over, curiosity overcoming his apprehension. The old man approached the window, his eyes hollow and unblinking. "You shouldn't be here," he said in a gravelly voice. "This road, it's not safe. There's something in these woods, something that waits for the lost." Max frowned, his skepticism getting the better of him. "I appreciate the warning, but I'm fine, just trying to get home." The old man's gaze bore into him, his expression solemn. "The forest has a way of claiming those who disregard its warnings. Leave now, while you still can." With that, the old man turned and walked back into the woods, disappearing into the darkness. Max watched him go, a shiver running down his spine. He debated turning back, but ultimately decided to continue. After all, he was only a few miles from home. As he drove further, the trees seemed to close in even more, and the road became increasingly treacherous. The comforting hum of his truck engine was the only sound breaking the oppressive silence. He tried to shake off the old man's words, but a gnawing sense of dread clung to him. Just as he began to think he should have heeded the warning, the headlights flickered and then went out completely. Max slammed on the brakes, plunging into total darkness. He fumbled for his flashlight, his heart racing. When the light finally cut through the void, he found himself surrounded by shadows and an eerie stillness. Suddenly, he heard a rustling noise behind him. Max turned around, his flashlight beam dancing nervously through the trees. The rustling grew louder, and a low growl reverberated through the forest. Panic set in as he saw something moving in the distance, something large and menacing. He squinted, trying to make out the shape, but the darkness was too thick. With a deep breath, he turned the key in the ignition. The engine roared to life, and he sped down the road, desperate to escape whatever was lurking in the woods. The trees seemed to stretch endlessly in every direction, and the oppressive darkness pressed in on him from all sides. Max's mind raced as he drove, trying to remember the landmarks that would lead him back to safety. The old man's warning echoed in his mind, and he realized he should have listened. The forest was alive with something he couldn't understand, and he was no longer sure which way was home. Max's heart pounded as he navigated the winding road through the forest. The oppressive darkness outside seemed to press in on him, and the shadows of the trees danced menacingly in the dim light of his truck. The growling sound from earlier still echoed in his mind, making every rustle and snap of branches seem amplified. The road ahead was uneven and treacherous, with potholes and sharp turns that tested his driving skills. Max focused intently on the path, trying to ignore the gnawing fear that had settled in his gut. His thoughts raced back to the old man's warning. He wondered if he had stumbled into something that was better left alone. As he rounded a particularly sharp bend, the truck's headlights briefly illuminated an old, decrepit cabin hidden among the trees. Max's curiosity was piqued, but he quickly dismissed the thought of exploring it. His priority was to get out of the forest as quickly as possible. He drove on, but the sight of the cabin lingered in his mind, an unsettling reminder of the forest's secrets. Minutes turned into hours as he drove deeper into the woods, the road showing no sign of leading to safety. The growling sound had ceased, but an eerie silence had taken its place. The only sound was the relentless hum of the truck's engine and the occasional creak of the vehicle's suspension as it hit bumps in the road. Suddenly, the truck's engine began to sputter and lose power. Max's anxiety surged as he watched the fuel gauge drop dangerously close to empty. He had not anticipated being stuck in the forest for so long. His gaze flickered nervously between the darkened forest and the gauge. The truck eventually came to a halt, the engine sputtering to silence. Max tried to restart the engine, but it was no use. He was stranded. He looked around, the darkness of the forest seeming to close in on him. The only light came from the faint glow of his truck's dashboard and the distant twinkling of stars above. With a deep breath, he decided to get out and check the situation. As he opened the door and stepped into the cold, damp night, he felt a chill run down his spine. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth and decaying leaves. Max walked to the front of the truck, checking the engine piece, but saw nothing obviously wrong. The rustling sound from earlier returned, more pronounced this time. Max's flashlight beam cut through the darkness, revealing nothing but trees and underbrush. The growling noise was faint but persistent, coming from somewhere deeper in the woods. Max's nerves were frayed, and he was beginning to regret not listening to the old man's warning. He considered walking back to where he had seen the cabin, hoping it might offer some shelter. As he started walking, the forest seemed to come alive with strange noises, branches snapping, leaves rustling, and the occasional distant howl. The darkness was oppressive, and every shadow seemed to conceal some hidden menace. The cabin came into view once more, its dilapidated structure even more foreboding under the moonlight. Max approached cautiously, his flashlight revealing broken windows and a sagging roof. The door was slightly ajar, creaking softly as it swung in the breeze. Max hesitated at the threshold, his instincts telling him to stay away. But the alternative was to remain stranded in the forest with no clear path to safety. Taking a deep breath, he stepped inside. The interior was dark and musty, with the faint scent of mold and decay. The floorboards creaked under his weight, and the only light came from the occasional beam of moonlight filtering through the broken windows. As he moved deeper into the cabin, Max noticed strange symbols carved into the walls, their meanings unknown but unsettling. The cabin felt like a place frozen in time, as if it had been abandoned abruptly. Max's unease grew with each step he took. Just then, he heard a loud crash from outside. Startled, he rushed to the window and saw a shadowy figure moving swiftly through the trees. The growling noise was louder now, almost as if it were closing in on him. Max's heart raced as he realized that whatever had been following him was now dangerously close. With a mixture of fear and determination, Max knew he had to find a way out of the forest before it was too late. He quickly gathered his belongings and prepared to leave the cabin, his senses on high alert as he faced the unknown dangers lurking in the darkness. Max exited the cabin, the night air now feeling colder and more oppressive. The forest was alive with eerie sounds. The growling was louder, closer, and mingled with unsettling howls that echoed through the trees. His flashlight cut through the darkness, but the beam seemed to falter as if the forest itself was swallowing the light. He started walking briskly, his senses heightened. The once familiar path now felt alien and disorienting. The trees seemed to close in around him, their gnarled branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. The growling noise seemed to be circling him, making it difficult to pinpoint its source. Max's heart raced as he stumbled over roots and uneven ground. The fear that gripped him was nearly paralyzing, but he forced himself to keep moving. The howls grew louder and more frequent, creating a sense of impending doom. He glanced over his shoulder, but the darkness revealed nothing but shadows. He noticed a faint light in the distance and hoped it might be a sign of civilization. Pushing through the underbrush, he made his way toward the light, which seemed to flicker like a distant lantern. As he got closer, he realized it was coming from a clearing in the forest. His hope surged, but it was quickly tempered by the growing sense of dread. The clearing was eerily silent when he emerged from the trees. In the center stood an old, abandoned campsite, complete with a fire pit surrounded by a circle of stones. The remnants of a fire lay cold and dark, and scattered around were old camping gear and broken equipment. The scene looked as if it had been deserted abruptly. Max's flashlight swept over the campsite, and he noticed something peculiar: animal tracks in the dirt. They were large, with clawed impressions that looked disturbingly human. The tracks led away from the campsite and deeper into the forest. As he followed the tracks, the howling grew louder, and the growling seemed to be right on his heels. Panic set in as he pushed through the underbrush, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The tracks led him to a dense thicket where he could barely make out the path. He forced his way through, his flashlight illuminating twisted branches and dense foliage. Suddenly, he heard a blood-curdling scream from behind him. He whipped around, but the darkness revealed nothing. His flashlight flickered and then went out, plunging him into pitch darkness. The howling and growling seemed to converge around him, creating a cacophony of terror. In the blackness, Max's mind raced. He realized he had to keep moving or risk being caught by whatever was hunting him. He stumbled through the thicket, desperately trying to find a way out. The forest was disorienting, with trees and shadows playing tricks on his eyes. He emerged from the thicket into a small, overgrown graveyard, the headstones leaning at odd angles and partially covered in moss. The sight was both eerie and unexpected. The graveyard seemed to hold a grim history, and Max's fear escalated as he noticed fresh dirt on one of the graves. The growling and howling reached a fever pitch, and Max could feel the presence of something malevolent close behind him. His legs were burning with exhaustion, but he forced himself to keep moving, driven by the primal instinct to survive. As he continued through the graveyard, he saw a figure standing among the headstones. The figure was cloaked in shadow, its eyes glowing an unnatural yellow. Max's blood ran cold as he realized that this was no ordinary creature. The figure was tall and imposing, with a predatory stance. With no other options, Max turned and ran, his only thought being to escape the looming presence. The figure followed, its growls and howls echoing through the graveyard. Max's fear was now a tangible force, pushing him forward as he sprinted through the forest. In a final desperate attempt to escape, Max spotted a narrow path leading out of the graveyard. He took it, hoping it would lead him to safety. The path was overgrown but seemed to be moving in the right direction. As he ran, he glanced back and saw the shadowy figure disappearing into the distance, its presence fading as if it had been a figment of his imagination. Max's breath came in ragged gasps as he emerged from the forest into a small, deserted road. He was battered, exhausted, and his clothes were torn, but he had escaped the immediate danger. As he looked back at the dark forest, he knew that his ordeal was far from over. The forest held secrets that he had barely scratched the surface of, and the true nature of the threat was still to be revealed. Max stumbled along the deserted road, his breath still coming in ragged gasps. The oppressive silence of the forest was replaced by an eerie stillness, broken only by the distant sounds of nocturnal creatures. He glanced back toward the dark tree line, feeling the weight of what he had just experienced. As he walked, he noticed the road seemed to stretch endlessly. There were no signs of civilization, and the darkness seemed to deepen with each step. Desperation clawed at him, urging him to find shelter or any sign of life. His flashlight had died during his frantic escape, leaving him in almost complete darkness. After what felt like hours, Max spotted a dim light in the distance. It was a small, run-down diner, its neon sign flickering sporadically. Relieved, he quickened his pace and reached the diner's parking lot, the gravel crunching beneath his feet. The diner looked abandoned, its windows grimy and the paint peeling, but the light was a beacon of hope. He pushed open the door, which creaked ominously, and stepped inside. The interior was musty and covered in dust. Old booths and tables were scattered around, and a faded menu hung behind the counter. The diner seemed frozen in time, like a relic from a bygone era. Max called out, but the only response was the echo of his voice. As he approached the counter, he noticed a worn notebook lying open on one of the tables. The pages were filled with scribbled notes and sketches of wolves, some of which were marked with strange symbols. Max picked it up, intrigued but unsettled by the content. A sudden noise from the kitchen startled him. It sounded like something, or someone, moving around. Max approached the kitchen cautiously, his heart pounding. The kitchen was in disarray, with old utensils and pots scattered about. A rusted refrigerator stood against one wall, its door slightly ajar. He cautiously opened the refrigerator door and found it empty, except for a few old cans and jars. Just as he was about to turn away, a chilling breeze swept through the kitchen, causing the hairs on the back of his neck to stand on end. The air grew colder, and the temperature dropped noticeably. Max's flashlight beam flickered back on as he heard a low growl coming from behind him. Spinning around, he saw a figure emerging from the shadows of the kitchen. It was a man, pale and gaunt, with hollow eyes that seemed to pierce through the darkness. His clothes were tattered, and he moved with an unsettling, jerky motion. "Who are you?" Max demanded, his voice trembling. The figure didn't respond immediately, but his eyes glowed faintly with an unnatural light. "You shouldn't be here," the man said in a raspy voice, his tone filled with a mix of sorrow and warning. "This place is cursed. It holds the echoes of those who failed to escape the forest." Max tried to make sense of the man's words. "What are you talking about? What happened in the forest?" The man's eyes filled with a deep, haunting sadness. "Long ago, this diner was a safe haven for travelers, but something dark was awakened in the forest, a creature that preys on the fear and despair of those who enter its domain. We were the first to fall victim, and now our souls are bound to this place." Max's blood ran cold. The man's story seemed to fit the strange occurrences he had witnessed. "How can I escape? I need to get out of here." The man looked at Max with a mix of pity and resignation. "The only way to escape is to confront the darkness in the forest. The creature feeds on the fear of those who enter. You must find the source of its power and destroy it, or you'll be trapped here forever." Max's mind raced. He needed answers and a way to end the terror that had gripped him. He asked the man for more information about the creature and how to find it, but before he could get any more details, the man vanished into thin air, leaving only the chilling silence behind. Feeling a renewed sense of urgency, Max decided to head back into the forest at first light. He had to confront the creature and end this nightmare once and for all. But as he left the diner and looked back at its dim light fading in the distance, he couldn't shake the feeling that he had only uncovered a small part of a much larger and darker mystery. Dawn broke with a muted light filtering through the thick canopy of the forest. Max set out with renewed determination, the night's eerie events fresh in his mind. He retraced his steps back into the forest, feeling both trepidation and resolve. The foreboding trees loomed overhead, their twisted branches like skeletal hands reaching out to ensnare him. As he ventured deeper, Max noticed the forest seemed to pulse with an unsettling energy. The trees whispered secrets, and the undergrowth rustled with unseen creatures. The air was thick with the scent of decay, and the once familiar path now seemed foreign and hostile. Hours passed, and Max began to question his decision. The forest appeared endless, the dense foliage blocking out any semblance of direction. Exhausted and disoriented, he stopped to rest against a large, gnarled tree. His mind raced with the man's warning, and he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. Suddenly, a blood-curdling howl pierced the silence. Max's heart raced as he scrambled to his feet. The howl was followed by a series of growls and snapping branches, drawing nearer. Panic surged through him as he realized he was not alone. The creature, whatever it was closing in. He sprinted through the underbrush, branches slapping against his face. His flashlight, now dim and flickering, barely cut through the darkness. Desperation fueled his flight, and he stumbled over roots and rocks, trying to escape the pursuing menace. Just when he thought he couldn't run any longer, he spotted a flickering light through the trees. Pushing through the thick vegetation, he emerged into a small clearing. At the center stood an ancient stone altar, covered in cryptic runes and surrounded by strange, glowing symbols. The air around it crackled with an ominous energy. Max approached the altar cautiously, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The runes seemed to pulse with a dark, almost malevolent force. He noticed that the symbols matched those in the notebook he had found in the diner. His instincts told him that this was the heart of the forest's darkness. As he studied the altar, he he heard a low growl behind him. Turning slowly, he saw the creature emerging from the shadows. It was a massive, hulking figure with glowing yellow eyes and fur as black as night. Its form shifted and writhed, as if the darkness itself was alive. The creature's snarl reverberated through the clearing, and Max knew he was face to face with the entity from the man's story. The creature lunged at him, its claws swiping through the air. Max dodged and stumbled backward, barely escaping the razor-sharp talons. He had no choice but to fight or be torn apart. He grabbed a sturdy branch from the ground and used it to fend off the beast, but it was clear that brute strength alone wouldn't be enough. Recalling the man's warning, Max realized that the altar might hold the key to ending the terror. He took a deep breath and focused on the runes, trying to decipher their meaning. The symbols seemed to shift and change, revealing a pattern. Max realized they formed a protective barrier, and he might be able to use it to his advantage. As the creature closed in, Max frantically traced the runes with the branch, hoping to activate the barrier. The ground beneath the altar began to tremble, and the runes glowed brighter. A surge of energy emanated from the altar, pushing the creature back. It howled in frustration and anger as the protective force repelled it. Max's heart pounded as he continued to activate the runes. The creature roared and clawed at the barrier, but the energy seemed to hold strong. With a final surge of effort, Max completed the activation. A blinding flash of light erupted from the altar, and the creature was thrown backward, disappearing into the shadows with a final, agonized howl. The clearing fell silent, the oppressive atmosphere lifting slightly. Max was exhausted and disoriented, but felt a sense of relief. The barrier had worked, but he knew that the danger wasn't completely over. He had confronted the darkness, but had yet to understand its full extent. As he caught his breath and took stock of his surroundings, Max realized he needed to find a way out of the forest and uncover the truth behind the curse. He had survived the encounter, but the forest still held many secrets, and he needed to uncover them before it was too late. Max's resolve hardened as he navigated the forest, his mind swirling with questions and the remnants of fear. The altar's protective barrier had provided temporary relief, but he knew it wasn't the end of his journey. The forest, with its ancient secrets and supernatural entities, demanded answers. He followed a faint trail leading away from the altar, the air still heavy with an unsettling quiet. The trees seemed to close in around him, their shadows twisting and shifting with each step. The once dense foliage began to thin, and he saw a faint light in the distance. As he approached, Max realized he had reached the edge of the forest. Beyond the trees lay a small, dilapidated cabin, half hidden by overgrown vegetation. The sight was both eerie and inviting. Max approached cautiously, his flashlight casting long shadows across the cabin's weathered exterior. He hesitated before pushing open the creaky door. Inside, the cabin was dark and musty, filled with the scent of mildew and decay. Dust motes danced in the slivers of light that filtered through broken windows. The interior was sparsely furnished, with a rickety table and a few chairs. In one corner, an old fireplace stood cold and empty. Max's gaze fell upon a stack of journals and old newspapers on the table. He rifled through them, hoping to find clues about the forest's curse and the mysterious creature he had encountered. As he skimmed through the pages, a pattern began to emerge. The journals described a series of strange occurrences and disappearances in the forest, dating back decades. One entry caught his eye. It detailed an old legend about a pact made with a dark entity that resided in the forest. According to the legend, the entity was bound by a curse that required it to protect the forest and keep intruders at bay. The pact had been made in exchange for a promise of eternal servitude, which explained the creature's relentless pursuit of those who ventured too close to its domain. Max's heart raced as he realized the gravity of what he had discovered. The curse wasn't just a local superstition, it was a tangible reality that had been affecting people for years. The creature was bound to the forest, its malevolence a result of the dark pact made long ago. His thoughts were interrupted by a noise outside. Max tensed, his flashlight flickering as he peered through the window. He saw a shadowy figure moving through the trees. He grabbed a nearby crowbar for protection and cautiously stepped outside. As he approached the figure, he could see it was a man, older, with a rugged appearance. The man's eyes were weary and filled with a deep sadness. Max recognized him as the man who had warned him in the diner. The realization hit him with a mix of relief and dread. The man, whose name was revealed to be Harold, looked at Max with a somber expression. "You've found the truth, I see," he said, his voice rough but steady. "The forest has claimed many souls, including my own." Max's eyes widened. "What do you mean? You're not alive?" Harold nodded. "I was one of the many who ventured into the forest years ago, seeking to break the curse. But I failed. Now I'm bound to this place, forced to warn others and watch as they suffer the same fate I did." Max listened intently as Harold explained the nature of the curse. The dark entity had been bound to the forest, its power growing stronger with each soul it claimed. The only way to break the curse was to confront the entity and destroy the source of its power. However, doing so required a sacrifice, one that Harold had been unable to make. Harold's story was a tragic reflection of Max's own journey. Both had been drawn into the forest's darkness, seeking answers and finding only horror. But unlike Harold, Max still had a chance to end the cycle of suffering. The two men discussed their options. Max realized that the protective barrier he had activated earlier was only a temporary solution. To truly break the curse, he needed to find the source of the entity's power and destroy it. Harold, despite his spectral existence, offered to guide Max through the remaining dangers of the forest. As they prepared to leave the cabin, Harold's form began to fade. "The forest has taken its toll on me," he said, his voice growing faint. "But you have a chance to end this. Remember, the true power lies at the heart of the forest." Max nodded, understanding the gravity of his task. He felt a renewed sense of purpose and determination. With Harold's guidance, he would face the darkness head-on and end the curse that had plagued the forest for so long. Max and Harold ventured deeper into the forest, guided by the spectral presence of the old man. The dense canopy above filtered the sunlight, casting an eerie twilight over their path. The air grew colder and heavier with each step, as if the forest itself was resisting their intrusion. Harold led Max through a maze of twisted trees and gnarled roots, his ethereal form occasionally flickering in and out of visibility. The deeper they went, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. The sounds of the forest, once calming, were now replaced by unsettling whispers and distant, mournful howls. The forest seemed to be alive with malevolent energy, as if it were aware of their mission. The trees appeared to close in around them, their branches like skeletal hands reaching out. The fog that clung to the ground grew thicker, reducing visibility to mere feet ahead. Finally, they arrived at a clearing. At its center stood an ancient, gnarled tree, its branches twisted into grotesque shapes. The tree exuded an aura of dark power, its roots snaking into the ground like dark veins. This was the source of the curse, a malign force that had bound the entity to the forest. Max's heart pounded as he took in the sight. The tree seemed to pulse with an otherworldly energy, and he could sense the presence of the dark entity growing stronger. He knew that confronting it would be the most dangerous part of his journey. Harold's voice, though faint, was steady. "This is where the entity's power is concentrated. To break the curse, you need to destroy the heart of this darkness. But be warned, the entity will try to stop you. It will use everything in its power to protect itself." Max nodded, steeling himself for the confrontation. He had prepared for this moment, but the reality of facing an ancient and malevolent force was daunting. He drew a deep breath and stepped forward, his flashlight casting a feeble beam on the tree's dark, twisted trunk. Suddenly, the ground trembled, and a chilling wind howled through the clearing. Shadows seemed to swirl around the ancient tree, and Max could feel the malevolent presence of the entity closing in on him. The air grew colder, and an oppressive darkness began to envelop the clearing. The entity emerged from the shadows, a monstrous, shifting form of darkness, with glowing red eyes and a shape that seemed to defy definition. It moved with a fluid, unnatural grace, its presence exuding an overwhelming sense of dread. Max's heart raced, but he forced himself to remain focused. He knew that hesitation could be fatal. He took out a small vial of sacred salt he had prepared earlier, believing it might weaken the entity. With a steady hand, he began to circle the ancient tree, sprinkling the salt along its roots. As he worked, the entity roared in anger, its form writhing and distorting. It lunged at Max, its shadowy tendrils reaching out to ensnare him. Max dodged and continued his task, determined not to let fear overwhelm him. The battle was intense. Max fought to maintain his focus, knowing that the salt alone wouldn't be enough. He needed to find the core of the entity's power and destroy it. He recalled Harold's words about a sacrifice, but he had no idea what that would entail. Finally, Max found a small and hidden compartment in the roots of the ancient tree. Inside was a dark, pulsating crystal, the heart of the entity's power. The crystal radiated a sinister energy, and Max could feel its malevolent influence. He reached for the crystal, but the entity's wrath was overwhelming. It lashed out with furious energy, and Max was thrown back by a powerful force. He scrambled to his feet, his determination unwavering. He knew that he had to succeed, no matter the cost. Max took a deep breath and, with a surge of courage, grasped the crystal. As he did, the entity howled in anguish, its form convulsing and distorting. Max could feel the power of the crystal coursing through him, an intense, burning sensation that threatened to consume him. With a final, desperate effort, Max crushed the crystal in his hand. The forest erupted in a blinding flash of light, and a deafening roar filled the air. The dark energy dissipated, and the oppressive darkness that had engulfed the clearing began to lift. Harold's form appeared beside Max, his expression one of relief and gratitude. "You've done it," he said, his voice filled with a mix of sadness and hope. "The curse is broken. The forest will be free." Max looked around. The once foreboding clearing now bathed in a soft, tranquil light. The ancient tree had withered, its dark power vanquished. The forest was beginning to heal, the malevolent presence replaced by a sense of calm and renewal. As Harold's form began to fade, he offered Max a final, reassuring smile. "Thank you. You've given us all a chance to find peace." Max watched as Harold disappeared, his spirit finally free. He felt a profound sense of accomplishment and relief. The journey had been perilous, but he had overcome the darkness and restored balance to the forest. As Max made his way back through the now peaceful forest, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. He had faced his fears and emerged victorious, breaking the curse and bringing hope to those who had been trapped in the forest's darkness for so long. As dawn approached, Max walked through the forest with a heavy heart but a renewed sense of hope. The once oppressive atmosphere had transformed into a serene and healing environment. The trees, now bathed in the soft light of early morning, seemed to breathe a sigh of relief. Max paused at the edge of the forest, looking back one last time. The area around the ancient tree, once a place of darkness, was now covered with new, vibrant foliage. The forest had begun to reclaim its natural beauty, a testament to the end of the curse. He thought about the lives that had been affected by the entity's malevolence, the lost souls who had been trapped, and the people who had suffered from its dark influence. Max had seen the forest's pain and had fought to bring about its redemption. It was a mission he had undertaken not just for himself, but for those who had come before him, and for those who would come after. As he emerged from the forest and approached the small town where he had first arrived, the sun was rising, casting a golden glow over the landscape. The townspeople, who had heard about the disturbances in the forest, were now gathered in the square, their faces reflecting a mixture of curiosity and hope. Max was met by a few locals who had ventured out to search for him. They had been anxious about his well-being, and their concern was palpable. One of them, an elderly woman named Mrs. Langford, approached him with a warm smile. "We were worried about you," she said, her eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you for what you've done." Max nodded, acknowledging her words. "The forest is free now, the curse is lifted," he said. "It's time for everyone to begin healing." Mrs. Langford's expression changed to one of relief. We had heard rumors about what was happening. It's a blessing to know that it's over. As the town began to return to its normal routine, Max found himself reflecting on his journey. The battles he had fought, the sacrifices he had made, and the discoveries he had uncovered all contributed to a profound personal transformation. The forest's redemption was not just a victory over darkness, but also a personal victory over his own fears and doubts. In the days that followed, Max stayed in the town to help with the recovery efforts. The local community welcomed him with open arms, recognizing his bravery and the role he had played in ending the forest's torment. Max assisted in restoring the areas affected by the entity's curse and helped to rebuild the forest trails that had been damaged. He also took time to visit the forest regularly, ensuring that the peace he had fought for was maintained. The forest, once a place of dread and darkness, had become a symbol of renewal and hope. Max often walked the trails, marveling at the changes and appreciating the tranquility that now permeated the woods. As weeks turned into months, Max felt a deep connection to the forest and its people. He had come to the town as a stranger seeking answers, but had left as a hero who had made a difference. His journey had been fraught with danger, but it had also been a journey of self-discovery and personal growth. One crisp autumn evening, as Max sat by the edge of the forest, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and pink, he felt a sense of profound peace. The trials he had faced had led him to this moment of clarity and fulfillment. He had not only freed the forest from its curse, but had also found a new sense of purpose and belonging. The forest, now bathed in the warm light of the setting sun, stood as a testament to the triumph of light over darkness. Max knew that the peace he had helped restore was a fragile and precious thing, but he also knew that it was worth every sacrifice he had made. As the night descended and the stars began to twinkle above, Max stood up and took one last look at the forest. The shadows of the past had been replaced by the promise of a brighter future. With a sense of contentment, he turned away, ready to embrace the next chapter of his life, knowing that he had made a lasting impact on the world around him. The forest had been redeemed, and so had Max. The journey had been long and arduous, but it had ended with a sense of hope and renewal that would continue to shine brightly for years to come. If you liked it, comment below, like and subscribe.